Thanks everybody for joining us today for this very special event with the United States Postal Service, the UX community, and Digitalgov. Hope you're in the right place. This is Customer Experience and Continuous Improvement, the USPS digital approach. And this event is hosted by our UX community, and I dropped a link to that community in the chat, so please feel free to join. And that community is co-chaired by Jean Fox, and she's a UX researcher at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and a co-chair of the COP, as I mentioned. So a bit of ground rules for today. As a reminder, this event is being recorded. Folks will not be allowed to come off of mute, so please put any questions you may have in the chat. As a reminder, this is recorded, and put any questions you have in the chat. With that, I will turn it over to Jean.
Great, thanks, Alex, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I am, as he said, I'm Jean Fox. I'm the co-chair of the U.S. Government User Experience Community of Practice. We're a cross-agency group that provides support to those doing UX work at all levels of the government in the U.S. We offer events like this webinar. We have the Government UX Summit, which some of you may have attended over the summer. And those are great opportunities where we can share information and lessons learned with each other. The group is open to anyone with an interest in UX and a US government email. There'll be, as Alex said, there's information about the group in the chat. We've got a pretty active listserv, which is a great way to learn from others doing UX in government. So it's got great activity, but not too much that it's overwhelming. I want to thank the staff at GSA who are handling all the logistics for today's webinar. We could not do this without them. They did the registration and they're managing the streaming technology, so thank you for that. I'm really excited to learn more about CX and UX at the Postal Service. I know it's always helpful to learn what other agencies are doing, because we kind of, like, I know for me, I get so caught up in what I'm doing day to day that it's hard to learn from see what other groups are doing. So this is a really great opportunity. And again, we'll get to the questions at the end of the session. So please place your questions in the chat. And then look there, there'll be some other information from GSA there as well. So with that, I'm going to turn everything over to Matt, Jeff, and Alex, who will share their presentation with us. So thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for having us today, and we'll do some brief introductions here before we get started. My name is Matt Petrowski. I am the program manager for the Digital Analytics program here at USPS.com. Cut my teeth in digital starting in 2007 in digital ad ops, and joined the USPS digital brand marketing team in 2014.
I'm Jeff Pass. I'm the UX team lead for USPS.com. Sadly, I've been doing this job as long as our site's been around, so 23 years. Not for USPS though. I am a contractor, and I'm sort of the usability czar and style guide and compliance czar for USPS, which makes me the mean guy compared to Alex, who will introduce himself now.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex. I'm also a contractor, but I'm the UX business team lead for USPS.com. Although I think I'm a little bit more green than these folks over here, I help lead user research efforts, manage the UX business processes, and help maintain the UX strategy and operations in support of digital brand marketing. But with that being said, now that you met us, it's time to dive into the unique space that USPS finds itself operating in, where you'll learn a little bit more about the history and the evolution of USPS.com, followed by an exploration into our customer experience continuous improvement approach, which is why you're here today. And lastly, how it was put to the test this past year. But first, a little background on USPS.com. Turn it over to Matt.
If I could interrupt though, we have a lot of imagery throughout this deck, most of which is owned by USPS. We have citations at the end of the deck that people can look at in detail once the deck is shared out. But just know that everything here will have a citation or is owned outright by the United States Postal Service.
All right, before we dive into the meat and potatoes of the presentation, it's very important that we have a discussion about the scale of USPS, not only as an organization, but also as a digital property. And as you can see here on the left, we move a lot of mail pieces. You can think of your mail pieces as letters, as postcards, anything that is in the mail system. And we also generate quite a bit of revenue on an average day. It's important to realize, I found over the years that many people don't know this, but all of the revenue that we receive goes towards our operating expenses. We do not receive any tax dollars for our operating expenses. So for us, CX becomes even more important when we are thinking about ways that we can improve the customer experience and generate new lines of revenue as an organization overall. When we look at the digital property, for FY20, we averaged about 7.1 million sessions per day, generated about $890,000 in sales per day. And you can see our breakdown of devices there as well. And this number is reflective of devices without tracking being accounted for. And tracking is by far one of our largest sources of traffic on USPS.com. If we were to add tracking into the fold, you would see that mobile number go up to 69%. You would see that desktop number drop to 29%. And tablet wouldn't really have that much of a change, but it would be around 2%. And overall, we do deal with a lot of economies and international partners as well. Our post office, in terms of parcels and letters, we deliver more of them per full-time equivalent employee than any other of the G20 countries and the posts that they have. So what we're dealing with is quite a big scale, both on the organizational front, but also on the digital front. And if we move on to this next slide, we can talk a bit more about how that factors into the overall strategic plan for USPS. We do have an annual report that we submit to Congress on a yearly basis, where we discuss the finances and the performance of USPS. We are accountable for both of those areas. And within the annual report for FY19 and as part of this 5-year strategic plan, all of the goals that are outlined by USPS as an organization are items that still fall within the scope of CX. Even goal number 5, legislative and regulatory changes can still have an impact about the information that we have to provide to our customers, when we provide it, how we provide it, and the language that's used. So there are a lot of different sources that we are looking to when it comes to the strategic direction of the organization and the influencers that we have to use to draft our strategy.
So we've talked a little bit about sort of the volume that USPS handles on a daily basis, both in terms of our retail operations, our physical in-person operations, if you will, brick and mortar, as well as digitally. I wanted to start introducing kind of USP. Oh, goodness, I'm actually speaking to your slide, Matt. I apologize. I'm terrible. I'm getting ahead of myself.
You were hitting the primary points. I was slow.
I read the title.
Yeah, overall, when we look at USPS.com, we're looking at a version of, you can kind of think of us as a 24-hour a day post office for many of the services and information that you need. Over the past 9 years, we've seen steady growth in our revenue. We continue to be successful in many ways, despite what the time and circumstances might throw at us. And as we've developed our digital growth, our CX strategy, we've been finding ways that we can help the operations team. How can what we do translate into improvements and optimizations that can happen out in the field, out in our retail post offices? What can we do to reduce the burden that might be taking place at these post offices, especially during the holiday season that we're running into? And as of late, for the past couple of years, one of our primary areas of focus has been around how can we reduce the call center volume. From a digital perspective, what information might we be able to provide? What avenues of self-serve can we give customers to prevent a call to the call center? So as we continue to evolve as an organization and generate, opportunities to be future ready, these are all factors that we're keeping in mind in terms of the organization speaking, and bridging the gap between the digital and retail post office experiences. And we'll touch on this a bit later in the presentation, but cultural relevance is also something that we are particularly attuned to, both in the revenue that we've been generating, but also some of the sentiment and how that affects the traffic and the revenue that we get on our site. So if we want to look at framing for USPS.com overall, in a way you can kind of think of this as a junior high awkward school dance. And I say this in the sense of we have to put two hats on when we are talking about our traffic and our revenue. The first hat that we have to wear is the hat of public information and mail services information. The second hat is the private sector mindset almost of generating revenue and increasing conversions. And all of this is relevant with the collaborations that we have with foreign entities or our competitors or partners, e-commerce sites. All of these entities are things that we have to consider when we're providing both a public service and also a retail service. So when you factor in the stakeholder relationships that we have, the CX approach and the CX approach for USPS.com becomes especially complicated in many ways, but we've learned a lot over the past 5 years through the evolution of our site. So over the 23 years that we've had our website, we've gone through about 7 major redesign changes, and we faced some design challenges in the sense of edicts almost that have been given based on reducing the amount of content that we have and simplifying what we do have on our site. So an example of this would be in 2014 when we were challenged with the activity of reducing the informational pages that we have on USPS.com from 250 to 50 pages, which, as you can imagine, threw us into a tizzy in terms of how do we figure out the reduction of pages, but still providing the right amount of content that customers need and want. So I think along those lines, it would be interesting for us to kind of move from this high-level understanding of USPS.com as an organization and who we're able to interact with, and move into a historical walk through time with Jeff and Alex as we take a look at how our homepage design has evolved over the past 23 years.
Yeah, so if you remember what I said a few slides back when I interrupted Matt, I probably said that better than I'm about to restate it now on the correct slide. But basically, over the last 23 years, as Matt said, we've had only 7 major redesigns, which by federal government website standards is not necessarily that odd. There's a lot of sites that are very, very slow to redesign. But if you think about our direct competitors, the FedExes, the UPSs of the world, as well as all of the major e-tailers, Amazon, eBay, whomever, who use our services or compete with our services, they're redesigning, much more frequently, say every other year or so, or continuous incremental changes, as is the case, for instance, with Amazon. But we wanted to give you a quick overview, and I think we can point out some of our kind of ongoing continuous improvement approach by looking at these home pages. So if we start in 1997, version 1.0 of our website was e-commerce out of the gate. We didn't do a great job with e-commerce because everyone was learning how to do it at that point. But from day one, you could buy stamps, you could print labels that you could affix to your own packages to be picked up by your letter carrier or dropped off elsewhere. It was business as usual from day one, and we've really maintained a lot of the same core content and functionality since 1997. What we have not maintained, and it hurts me deeply, is the tiled cloud background, which I think is the hallmark of any well-designed website. So sadly, when we move to the next year, 2003, that will go away and you will not see it again. However, you will still see that we are left aligned. We have a pretty narrow page width. And I'm actually keeping all of these screenshots kind of to scale inside of this large wide monitor so you can see the evolution of the width of our site, as well as the eventual move towards centered content and full width content. But by 2003, we were adding a lot of content and functionality and really making some calculated decisions about increasing information density and about collecting data and links and content together in multiple menu bars. As you'll see, there's 2 or 3 here, which is a far cry from the 7 or so rows that you had on the Amazon.com navigation in 2003, for folks who can remember that. But our evolution moved into this sort of row-based navigation and towards increased information density, as I said, and that kind of is a trend that continued as we moved into 2007. But at this point, we adopt a utility bar, so we start bringing things like your account information, login information, search, and other help features into a permanent utility bar, which lightens up the main navigation bar a little bit. But the really big and important thing about 2007, and I know this is very near and dear to everyone who attends digital.gov events, the introduction of the banner. Not to be underdone, in 2008, we turned that banner into a carousel with up to 10 different articles. Now, for any of you who are old enough to have been maintaining content for a federal government website with a carousel like this, you know that it was the best job you could hope to find. But in addition to that, oh goodness, sorry, I'm getting a little pop-up thing. In addition to that, we also started focusing on product-based imagery. So we really started to productize the site. You'll see that we're focusing on services and actually making those actionable so you can actually transact more easily. We also centered the body content, although still with a pretty narrow maximum page width. But this was the beginning, and I emphasize the beginning of us starting to think about how the site displays on different devices and at different sizes and resolutions. So moving on to 2011, I'm actually going to hand off to Alex, because at this point we're actually starting to become more of a modern website as opposed to a Web 1.0 site. So might as well let someone who is more of a digital native talk us through the rest of the evolution of the USPS.com homepage.
At this point, thanks, Jeff. At this point, I'm actually browsing the web and, you know, my young age. But fast forward 3 years to 2011, and you'd start to see really a shift in focus to, at this point, a lifestyle and kind of focusing on small businesses where we start to segment our customers and tailor our own content specifically based on interest. And I think what's more importantly, diversity across USPS.com. Also included in this iteration was the introduction of accessibility features such as the Quick Tools menu that you can see up in the slide here, and a move to a more modular design in that sense. It doesn't take until about 2014, another 3 years later, that, as Matt previously alluded to, 2014's redesign really followed the motto of less is more with this site simplification effort that not only simplified but streamlined the then 250 pages in existing content down to 50 pages. 2014 also made way for focus on mobile, that Jeff alluded to, and what are now more conventional designs, such as a full width design, finally, hero image, and the introduction to the ever-present false floor page scrolling dilemma that many sites still face today. Bringing us up to 2018 at this point, we actually introduced the mega menu navigation to USPS's information architecture, and further refine the digital brand consistency through standardized fonts, colors, and user interface components, which really tees us up to where we are to this current day in 2019.
Oh, I apologize. Let me just go back because one question came up about the false floor. I'm going to go back one slide. Depending on your screen and your resolution, if you have gaps between pieces of content, depending on the device you're looking at, the resolution, and whether or not you're using it in tablet or landscape, you might think that you've reached the bottom of a page when in fact there's more content below. This is something we talk about in future slides, but it's much easier to illustrate on a screen like this. So I just wanted to address that. It's a real problem for websites that are viewed on lots of different devices and have a modular design. Sorry, Alex, back to you.
No, thank you. Well, I think most importantly at this point, it brings us to our present day design and what you may come to expect from a modern e-commerce site. Mobile responsiveness, the design system based, outlined by our own USPS digital style guide, if I might add, and ultimately customizable as seen in the configurable promotion spaces that rotate and refresh and an order based on traffic data essentially. Similarly, and most recently in 2020, we just rolled out a new action-oriented mega menu based on extensive testing of an updated send receive information architecture and through working with both the analytics and the customer feedback teams. And while you can see this live today at USPS.com, this is just one example of how we've been actively improving our design approach to be more data-driven. But for that, I'll turn it over to Matt.
I think you may be muted, Matt.
Apologies. The world of Zoom. There is a common progression that we've undergone over the past 6 years, especially with our tools and the platforms that we've been using, and also the design approach and control approach. And the first thing I wanted to start with is the top section here, where we're looking at an agency-driven approach versus in-house. And beginning around 2016, that 2016 to 2018 timeframe, is when we really started shifting a lot of the agency-driven design work that was being done and bringing it in-house. And that was also around the same time that we were doing the same thing with our analytics tool. Prior to 2014, we had been using Web Trends as our analytics tool, and we've kind of gone from one extreme to another. At the one extreme, when we had Web Trends, we were very dependent on our IT team to both generate reports, to tag different parts of the site, to create custom reports even. And where we are now in terms of 2020, we've migrated to Google Analytics. We have much more control in-house over the analytics that we're able to pull. And we've also added a data science component to that as well. And during that 2016 to 2018 timeframe as well, we joined the Digital.gov Digital Analytics program. That was a really big game changer for us because it gave us insight into the activities and the traffic in other federal agencies. And if I can use one example quickly here, it would be the Department of State, for example. One of the most trafficked areas that we have on USPS.com is for passports and passport information. And for us, the DAP program gave us the ability to be able to understand what is happening on the Department of State site around passports. What is the timing? When during the year are is traffic increasing, and when is it ebbing? And it gave us an opportunity to understand how our content can align better with other federal agencies with information that we have on our own site. So this could extend to any other agency. It could be IRS information, it could be HHS information related to the pandemic. DAP has really been a game changer for us to understand our role and interactions with other federal entities. And when we moved into the Google Analytics phase, we were able to do more integrations with our customer survey tool, which was Medallia, that we brought on in 2018. And in 2019, as Alex just showed you with the homepage redesign, that was really the first time that we had taken a data science approach to redesigning a part of our website. We worked very closely with the UX team, with the content management team, and we applied a lot of statistical analysis and marrying of this qualitative and quantitative data to figure out the best way forward when it came to where things would be placed on the homepage and even our promotional banners that would appear as well. As we look forward to where we want to go with our analytics program and a lot of the insight and research, ABM testing is really the final component that we'd like to put on there. And that will bring us a much faster insight to conclusion timeline, especially when it comes to quick changes that need to be adaptive. For example, I'm sure a lot of you have learned that during the pandemic, there have been many things that we've had to communicate or get out to customers in a very short period of time. And ABM testing on a wider scale for USPS.com will not only help us make a better decision on what to put out there, but what kind of format will work the best as well. So if we move on to what makes the USPS analytics different.
I apologize, I was just unmuting, Matt. I just wanted to add really quickly before it hits the chat, ABM stands for A/B testing and multivariate testing. And there's one little disclaimer actually on the previous slide I'd like to address, which is that the technology stack solution that we ended up using, Google, Medallia, others, was really specific to USPS's needs. This is not meant to be an endorsement of those per se. Any individual agency would have to sort of gauge their needs, their budgets, their other considerations to find the stack that works best for them. And as Matt alluded, it took us many years to find what we now believe to be an optimal combination of analytic tools that we use. Sorry about that.
A great transition to, between the size of the team as well. In 2014, when we had first started this digital analytics journey, there were only 2 of us, and we have grown to a team of over 10, including our data scientists. So it's been a great transition that we've been able to see over the years. And as Jeff said, the tools, we learned the hard way what tools would work and what tools would be most efficient for us. So as we move into the honing this USPS digital approach, we do obviously still want to focus on providing mail service information. It is still a priority for the organization overall. But what we have been able to provide more insight and research into with our new tools and platforms are additional revenue channels. Over the past 2 years, some of you may have seen the collaborations that we've done with companies like Forever 21, Antisocial Social Club, Fred Siegel, and as you can see here to the right on the slide, Casetify. And as we introduce new products and new audiences, there are new CX measurements and new CX challenges that come with this as well, all of which will influence the way that we collect data, how we measure data, and how we report that data out. The approach has evolved over time, and to echo what Gene had mentioned in the beginning, I've often, when I first started, I often fell into that trap of kind of looking outwards and thinking to myself, well, everybody else is doing this, why can't we? And one of the culminating moments that I had 2 years ago is we had met with the IRS Digital Analytics team and the HHS Digital Analytics team and basically sat in a room and just talked about the challenges that we have as digital analytics teams. And it was really, really insightful. I walked away with 2 primary points. One was a huge sigh of relief that we were not the only ones in the same boat as we were when it came to things like approval, when it came to things like the platforms and tools that we have. And then the other one was just, it was nice to know that things weren't as worse as I thought they were to begin with. And that is always a good thing. And I mention this too because there often isn't enough collaboration between many of the agencies, and I think a lot of the programs that Digitalgov offers and the listservs, those are extremely helpful for understanding how other people are working. And in the case of the U.S. Mint, with Treasury, I had just contacted them last year to figure out, some of the details of how they run their own e-commerce platform. What challenges do they have? What agency do they use? And what products, they are selling and how they choose those products. And, in the span of 2 one-hour sessions, I was able to learn a lot of information that will really help us as we draft our CX approach when it comes to analytics and e-commerce. But finally, I think, the one thing that really honed our approach here is data science. This has been a game changer, in my opinion. We brought our first data scientist on in 2018 to help us take the data that we have and take it to the next level of analysis. And what he was able to do was build a team of data scientists. The homepage that Alex showed previously from 2019, by that point we had 4 data scientists who were working on the team, and they were able to incorporate a variety of methods from machine learning to topic bucketing to help us understand precisely what people were looking for, not only from organic search, but also understanding it through our qualitative customer surveys and understanding it through other methods of analysis that involve customer feedback. So if there's one takeaway that I really would communicate to everyone, it is taking a closer look at that data science aspect, because there is a very big difference in many ways between just the standard digital analytics and how data science can take it to that next level.
So we've talked a little bit about the history of our site and some of the continuous improvement that we've implemented and the changes with the various redesigns and new functionality and content, and also sort of our data-informed approach to evaluating and understanding it. So now what we really want to shift to is a discussion of our customer experience and then to our continuous improvement process. So I just wanted to very quickly address sort of the imperatives as well as the priorities that we've identified from a customer experience standpoint, and then we'll see how those play out in a continuous improvement environment. As you've heard both Alex and Matt mention, audience is very, very important to us. And our audience is not just every household in America, since USPS is literally the only federal agency that has a touch point with every household in America, and very often every day, depending on what market you live in. In some places you still might not get Sunday delivery, but many places you do. But our audience is the entire country. But then there's a subset of our audience, which is the businesses within our country, at least small, medium, and micro-sized businesses. By the time you're a large-sized business, you're probably not working with the website so much as you are working with some of our large business tools. But we also have all these foreign shipping agents who are using us for tracking, to understand the regulations. So we really have to understand this diverse audience. And more importantly, we need to understand their expectations and how best to serve them. So I think John Rubin, who was one of the original founders of this community, had said that you're judged by the last great customer experience you had. That may be on another federal website, but more likely it's going to be on Amazon or on Zappos or on Etsy or some other for-profit e-commerce business site where they have a lot more money and advertising agencies and every other resource you can imagine to throw at their website. And that's what we're being judged against. And we really have to take that into account. And then we have to deliver value not only to our users and our customers, but also to our leadership and all of the people that rely on the USPS to provide essential services. And then of course we have to promote the USPS mission, which, just to paraphrase rather, is to bring the nation together and to create unity through the exchange of mail and packages, which is kind of a cool idea when you think about it. So that translates into several priorities that we try to play to in our daily work. One is service, serving our customers as well as the organization, but also listening. This is where we really start to think about our voice of the consumer, which in this case, as you saw Matt allude to, we're using Medallia currently. We've used a number of different tools, and I believe that there are still some free tools available that were developed, a VOC, voice of consumer tool, that was developed by the HHS ASPA team. Lots of different ways to do that, but it's essential that you do. Consistency. USPS, as I think we kind of glossed over before, there's the main website, there's the main postal store, the click and ship site where you can generate labels, but there's a dozen or more other small marketing sites, sub-sites, and subdomains, and having consistency across the experience so that anyone knows when they're on your agency site, they're legitimately on your agency site. Now, part of that goes back to conforming with the IDEAS Act, and before it, the Federal Digital Strategy, where we're identifying every page as belonging to a federal website, but it's also about the brand and the look and feel. Sustainability is also a priority for us. Not only sustainability in terms of our ability to serve our customers online, but also the sustainability of the larger United States Postal Service. As there are increasing pressures put on local post offices, the brick and mortars, as there is more consolidations, as there's a larger population, the digital services that we provide become more and more and more essential because we're having to deal with all manner of issues from an operational standpoint, many of which the digital frontier can relieve some pressure on. In terms of informing, we of course have to use all of this work that we're doing to inform our design approach, our user experience approach, our heuristics, but also very importantly, our leadership, to make sure that they have a true understanding of what we're trying to do and why, which is to say, to serve our customers. And so that sort of a process really helps us to set direction at a very high level and ensure that we can continue improving the website. And finally, promoting both the site, our customer relations, our content services, and above all, our customer experience. So with that, let's move into our actual continuous improvement approach. And for that, I'll hand it over to Alex.
Thanks, Jeff. And so in considering these priorities, this is the general framework for really how we pulled it all together. While certain elements might look familiar to many, the U.S. continuous improvement approach is an iterative process that borrows from both UX as well as continuous improvement life cycles together. It specifically combines, in our opinion at least, the benefits of objective analysis and data with iterative improvement in customer experience assessments across USPS.com. And while this blended approach ultimately it allows us to evolve our customer experience from both a quantitative as well as a qualitative perspective, and I dare I say it in an agile manner. But all of this, as we know, and as at least from what we see in this framework, it traditionally begins within the UX lifecycle. And so first and foremost, kind of regardless of whatever life cycle you find yourself in, whether you're starting from or the CX or the UX side of things, one thing is for certain, and that is that data is central to both. So you really do need to start with that goals, needs, and data analysis. But beyond that initial discovery and analysis activities, which include gathering those requirements, identifying ever-changing goals, and validating the data, all of which inform our design activities, we also need to ensure that user tasks are prioritized based on value and focusing on advocating for the user throughout those user task and design phases that you see on the right. But once those initial designs are finalized, we are also very quick to assess the solution, whether it's through formal usability testing, pulling together analytics, or working through customer feedback surveying to ensure that test acceptance and improved, and that you're achieving the intended outcome of an improved user experience. That is most often the most direct handoff from UX to CX life cycles in order to properly measure the impact of these designs, which of course would lead us to more of the CX side of things.
As we move into the analytics portion of this as well, many of these steps that you see here are not going to be revolutionary. There's nothing, very special in terms of how these are drafted or the process that we follow. But the one thing I do want to point out is in the first bullet point of define, and this has often been a point of contention for many teams in any organization. And oftentimes, when we think about our homepage, for example, we oftentimes have people who believe that their content or their presence on the homepage should be advanced, should be higher in the page. There should be more attention that's brought to their part of the site. And it's a common back and forth that we have with different business drivers. And oftentimes, as you may all relate as well, the qualification that they might have to move something or give it more priority is they use the internet. So what we do with the data part of it is we focus on removing all of the subjectivity from this. And if we do have business drivers that do come to us with these beliefs, with more of this gut feeling approach, it's reinserting that objectivity into the conversation, providing the data of what is actually happening. It's understandable that as a business driver, you have KPIs that you're responsible for and you have performance goals that you need to meet. So in some cases, it's finding a way to meet in the middle, but more often than not, I have noticed that it really takes that data approach to talk someone down from that particular ledge. Additionally, in terms of the advising part, I want to call that out as well. There are some exceptions that exist for any organization and any website. For us, I'm sure the USPS.com team is sick of me saying it because I say it all the time, but we often need to think about USPS.com as having multiple home pages. We do have a USPS.com proper that people can go to for information and as a home page, but we also have tracking results page, which elicits a huge amount of traffic. And we also have informed delivery, which is where people are able to see what mail and packages are going to be arriving at their residence or that business for that particular day. And just for some context, when we look at the October to December timeframe for last year, and we look at these specific pages, USPS.com received in that 3-month period 56 million users. Informed delivery received about 15 million users, but the tracking results page received 437 million users. So there's a huge differential between some areas of our site. And I know it exists in many of the sites that you all work with and maintain. And the big takeaway when it comes to data and looking at these steps is there are different audiences. Someone who is arriving at USPS.com to track their package may not be interested in anything else that USPS has to offer. They just want to know where their package is. Informed delivery, they may just be interested in knowing what's coming in the mail, no interaction with anything else. So it's being able to take these buckets and apply a CX analytics approach to saying, okay, we have 3 different groups that may not overlap with each other at all. How are we going to address the UX issues that we have with them, and how are we going to optimize the site accordingly? One example that I do want to bring from looking at the analytics approach, I was able to dig this out of our archives from early 2018, but this is a visualization map that we had made in reference to the 3 hurricanes from 2017, Harvey, Irma, and Maria. And essentially what we were trying to experiment with was looking to see how hurricane impact in these different areas of the country affected the tracking status that people saw in other areas of the country. So for example, a hurricane hitting Houston, how would that affect people who were seeing weather delays elsewhere in the country? So we can see here that Houston, Harvey hits Houston in 8:25. This next one, we have Hurricane Irma, which will hit Miami on the 9th of September. You can see the impact that had across the rest of the country with people who were checking their tracking statuses and how many were getting a weather delay back. And then finally, we had Maria that hit Puerto Rico on September 20th. Not as much of an impact, but still something that was noticeable. And this was a real watershed moment for the analytics team because it really helped us not only approach something from a data visualization standpoint, but it was something that would help bridge the gap between the digital team and the operations team. This is information, this is data that would be useful for us both. And it was really advanced the agenda of having a data science forward approach to our customer experience.
So we have, we experienced some weather in 2017, but we were able to deal with it pretty successfully from what you can see from what Matt just shared. And so now at this point, as we're sort of looking at our continuous improvement approach, we've got a plan, we've got a process, the sky is relatively blue, there's some clouds, but they're not dark or menacing. And we're tooling along really well on this possibly road through Florida. So, you know, what could possibly happen? Well, the answer is 2020. 2020 happened. It's the year that really put everything to the test. So what we'd like to do now is spend sort of the bottom third of this presentation just looking about how we have applied our continuous improvement approach to the unique challenges that we faced basically since February, March of this year.
So looking specifically at 2020, we all know COVID was a major factor of it thus far, continues to be, but we really wanted to look at some of the more interesting impacts that it had throughout the USPS as an organization, including a shift to retail industry from what is traditionally physical brick and mortar to heavy e-commerce, ordering and overall increasing all deliveries, untraditional fluctuations in both mail as well as package traffic, and impacts to domestic services throughout the US with international services halted entirely at times. And challenges involved in costly cleaning as well as operational complexity, most notably with the USPS staff. But this was just really the start to it all, as we come to find out later on in the year. These challenges were ultimately compounded by additional storms, including Hurricane Dorian, that as a Category 5 hurricane battered the US, causing various service interruptions and fires that continue to rage across California and Colorado. But I think closest to us, though, was the new reality for many working from home, which further stretched as well as strained IT resources. But considering in all of this, you know, how does all this tumult translate into data?
When we look at this time frame, our traffic picked up in the April time frame, and we decided to take a look at April to September and compare it to last year to see some of the larger trends that we would be able to share with you today. And as you can see, it's no surprise, I'm sure many of you have seen increases in your traffic and the same kinds of trends during this pandemic. In our case, traffic was about twice what it was in 2019. So if you look at the right side here, we have the largest areas of session growth in USPS.com, many of which you would expect. FAQs rising to the top. We have increased e-commerce purchasing from the postal store, informed delivery, people who were signing up or just using that service overall. One of the interesting points is schedule a pickup. This is an application, a part of our site that wasn't necessarily widely known by a lot of people, but in terms of traffic and information that has been provided has really grown exponentially year over year. And as you can see in the device breakdown as well, we have had some pretty significant trends in terms of increases in mobile and increases in desktop as well. But when we look overall at the pandemic and some of the 2020 items that Alex and Jeff have alluded to, one of the other factors that we were not expecting was public sentiment, which came in the month of August primarily. And there's a push with people with their social media accounts, with celebrities, with politicians, who were encouraging people to purchase products, purchase services from the U.S. Postal Service because of the public sentiment that surrounded our financial status and how prevalent it was in the news at that time. And what we saw during that August time period was, whereas we saw 2 times the traffic and transactions of COVID, we saw 4. It went up to about 4 times that of fiscal year 2019, and it was anchored by this sentiment. And it really generated the thought of a power of a tweet. And that's the screenshot that we have here. And the reason I wanted to use this example is because it's an excellent example of how one tweet can really change everything that we have on a particular site. This tweet was sent out, as you can see, 1:13 in the morning on July 30th, and what it resulted in was 500,000 page views to the part of our e-commerce site, the Postal Store, which deals with retail gifts. This page typically averaged about 10,000 page views a day, and in one day went up to 500,000. And what that does for us is it kind of reshaped the way on the analytics standpoint that we need to understand CX from unforeseen circumstances. This could be from any social media platform, but we did see retail products selling out very quickly, sometimes within the same day or within 2 days. And so social media has played a really big part of the way that we have to put on our hat of conversion and understand how we are not always dictating the CX approach, that it is often going to be dictated by social media or by this press. And how are we going to react and how are we going to tackle it above and beyond a pandemic?
So while tweets like this one may have been a bit of a surprise, we were equipped with all of the tools that we needed to react accordingly. And by the same token, USPS has been doing this for a long time. So while the epidemic or the pandemic or the political tumult or the tweet is a surprise, the process works, as is sort of evidenced by this photograph from 1918, during which a letter carrier was delivering mail dutifully every day, every weekday at that point, to all the households in America, not him individually. But for basically almost a 2.5-year period, letter carriers were wearing masks and gloves in 1918 and 1919 and 1920. We had to adapt. We took our normal services that we provided, our normal approaches, and we adjusted and adapted. And that's what we've been doing now. So taking some inspiration from the Spanish flu, in the COVID era and everything else that's accompanied it in 2020, we have used ad hoc applications of our metrics and customer satisfaction surveying, of our competitive and data analysis work, our UX work, our iterative data-informed design, and we've taken a new look at how we handle alerts and error messaging on our site in light of what's been happening in 2020. And just with deference to time, we'll probably move through these last chunk of slides pretty quickly, including this first one that I'll speak to. I just want to say that we have worked very, very hard, and by we I mean people far smarter than me. I'm a UXer. I can't figure out the data stuff, but the data team has come up with ways to take all the public sentiment coming in, all the analytics coming in, put it into beautiful dashboards that, in the case of this one, allow us to see where we are having issues across the different applications, the tools, the different parts of the website, and specifically what issues are being reported. And this is very, very important because we have found out that through customer feedback being submitted through our survey and also through just looking at these analytics, we are very often able to identify problems long before we get a trouble ticket from the customer care team, and in many cases before we even hear anything from automated system outage reporting. So we're not only able to identify problems more quickly, we are able to contextualize them and then attempt to mitigate or alleviate them. This is also, I just want to point out here, proven to be a really great usability testing mechanism. If in your customer service feedback survey, you add an opt-in where people can identify themselves as wanting or allowing the agency to contact them with further questions or to participate in usability studies, that's a great idea. And we have been able to recruit entire studies from people who opted in, who volunteered to help us. The same people who took time to fill out our customer service feedback forms with excellent feedback, oftentimes not the most glowing and positive because they're reporting an issue. So it's a great tool to use. But in addition to these analytics, we look at analysis in another way, including a competitive analysis, which Alex will address.
Time where each organization is really trying to tackle what the impacts of COVID were to the larger, not only operations as well as the digital presence. We actually found through competitive analysis to not just help get an understanding of the current landscape amongst competitors, foreign counterparts, and other federal agencies, as well as leading e-commerce platforms, to be quite frank, but to identify exactly where we were as USPS, where were we located on that landscape in terms of COVID-related content, messaging, and features. So using this approach, it actually provided us the chance to collect an inventory of contextual data and conduct reviews at any point in time throughout this pandemic to remain really at least a leader in the competitive landscape in terms of that sentiment, ensuring that we are providing the correct messaging and communications out to each of our users.
So in addition to competitive analysis, we're also using our compliance reviews, whether it's a style guide review, a plain language review, reviews based on the research-based web design and usability guidelines that HHS and usability.gov brought out a few years back, or our own set of heuristics, which for those of you who are kind of inside baseball UXers, are borrowed from Abby Covert's 10 heuristics and then heavily modified and adapted for USPS. But we have a process by which we can evaluate all of these things. And more importantly, in our heuristics and in our style guide, where we clearly set out specifications, we create a language of critique so that, just as Matt was talking about before, with us using data to help alleviate people's concerns or address their concerns about where their relative placement is on a page, we have the ability here for business drivers, customers, designers to communicate in a dispassionate way about very important things that might otherwise become emotional, like the clarity or the brandedness of a given message or tool or function.
I think one thing that is particularly interesting here is not only in our own effort to adapt and improve our own existing user research methods, usability testing for us, at least during the start of the COVID pandemic, we were able to shift rather seamlessly to entirely remote, which was very different from how we had previously operated. I think it was 50-50 in person previously. This, not so surprisingly, gave us greater participant diversity, no longer being limited by geographic location, and enabled us to deploy usability testing on evolving concepts at a much quicker rate than pre-COVID, allowing us to actually expedite the overall assessment process and the continuous improvement approach. And before we go to the next slide, I did mention to call it out at someone's question here, but this is exactly what we were referring to in the send receive information architecture, where actually we had gone through, redesigned based on usability testing, the mega menu from mail and ship, track and manage, postal store to send, receive, shop. So much more of an action-oriented mega menu navigation. So hope to address that question.
And I would just throw in a quick plug for the fact that as you move, as you may have already done, to more all digital usability testing and usability studies, focus groups, whatever, please don't forget about the Paperwork Reduction Act and all of the additional opportunities to capture PII that you encounter when you're doing things remotely with recordings intact. Build in extra time for reviewing those and making sure that your final artifacts and deliverables don't violate PRA. And that's a whole other presentation in and of itself, but just a reminder for that because it's very, very important. So with usability testing addressed, we wanted to talk very briefly about our design. We've mentioned a couple of times how hard hit small businesses have been during COVID and other issues related that we've experienced during 2020, closures due to unrest, so all of these steps we've already talked about culminated in our recent redesign of our small business section and our continuing work to update and improve our business landing section. It's worth noting here that we have, if I can just highlight it, we've kind of taken a lot of the excessive alert messaging that shows up again and again and again at times like this out of the alert bar and addressed it inline in the page. We know you're a small business. We know you're struggling with things related to COVID. We have some resources and we'll send them to you. It doesn't have to be us shouting in red bold type. We've also done a lot to sort of address the fact that, as in this image, you have a storefront that's open for business, customers in the background. That's not necessarily the reality right now. And so we wanted to update the imagery accordingly. And of course, this came out in October, which happens to be Women's Small Business Month. And so in keeping with USPS's prioritization of diverse representation on our website, we took the advantage to feature a small business owned by a woman. So we've moved through all of these things, and that takes us into our alert notifications, which I just mentioned. I'll glaze over this one largely because what we did was we borrowed the hard work done by the USDS, the United States Digital Service, and adapted it for USPS usage. We took their hierarchical alert system that includes red for priority, yellow for warnings, green for sort of good to know, FYI type information, adapted it and adopted it for USPS so that compared to, say, early in the year when we may have had 3 or 4 urgent action alerts about COVID, the census, election mail, and fires in the Pacific. And we've been able to streamline that to having a more minimal approach, although sometimes you do have to have more than one alert, and then addressing things in line using this modified approach. We found that that's a lot more successful, and as I mentioned on the previous screen, incorporating information about, say, small business relief into the body content of heroes on landing pages and that sort of thing, which helps you to pull it out of alert bars and really have your website be what it's supposed to be, informational and transactional. So with that, we just want to sort of summarize the lessons that we have learned and shared today, and we'll start off with Matt.
Yes, I won't go into all of these just for interest of time, but really just focusing on the amount of control that you have over the tools and integration, the proactive research you can do around search data and customer feedback to anticipate the customer needs that might occur, and social media in terms of these variables that you might not know of initially that can truly affect the way that you do things and how things are presented on the website overall.
From a user experience standpoint, it's what we all know. Merge quantitative and qualitative whenever you can. Make sure you get inputs from both your users and your business drivers. Design all the things that you can design, but don't over-design, and let your design be data-driven. And test, review, test again, and be as consistent as you can across the enterprise.
Ultimately, around continuous improvement, it's got to be flexible. It's got to be iterative, particularly recognizing where theory differs from practice. And ultimately, it must be maintained and evolved over time. It's a process that needs to be trusted and takes a little bit of time to be able to get that reinforcement. but ultimately never stops, because we certainly are.
So that's the end. I do want to go into, we have a lot of appendix that you can look at later, but I do want to pause on two very quickly. Special thanks to all of our leadership team and everyone that contributed directly to this presentation, as well as to our 10 integrated domain specific teams who make USPS.com work, but also who contributed to our continuous improvement process and the continuous improvement of that process.
All right, thank you guys. That was really great. There's a lot of great content there, and you're doing a lot of great work, and there's a lot to deal with. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for a Q&A. We did get a handful of questions in, so hopefully there'll be a way to address them. But thank you to Matt, Jeff, and Alex, and thank you to everyone who joined us today, and thank you to GSA who took care of all of the logistics and made sure the technology worked for everyone. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you at our next event, which we'll keep you posted on what we're doing next. So thanks very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.